Hi everyone, I'm Renee Hiatt of Sew on the Go. Welcome to Tutorial Tuesday week 17. It's been a few weeks between the episode for week 16 and 17, but I needed a couple of weeks off, and I hope you enjoyed yourself and worked on some fabulous things. I know I did. I got through a lot of my fall designs that are coming out, and so hopefully there'll be some exciting things there. One of them is my Turning Up Pumpkins that I just released last Tuesday. And so it is a really fun quilt. If you joined me for my Quilt Block Mania, you may have downloaded the free pumpkin block. But either way, the project that I'm going to work on for week 17 and week 18, it's going to be a two-parter, is going to be involving my Turning Up Pumpkins. All right? So when I made my Turning Up Pumpkins, I ended up making an extra block. It was really easy to do. You just make a couple extra units as you go. And I do this often, especially when I'm giving the quilt away as a gift, because I have another special project in mind for it. It's really a great idea, especially if you're giving a child a quilt, to do something so that you're giving them something extra. We're going to cover a pillow, but it could be a pillowcase that is using the same fabrics that you've used in their quilt. And this is because you want to have fabric in case that quilt needs to be repaired. If you give them a pillow or a pillowcase and tell them to wash the pillow cover every time they wash the quilt, the fabric will fade at the same rate as the quilt does. So I often do it as well when I'm making a holiday quilt. So this is a pumpkin quilt, can be used for Halloween or Thanksgiving, and so I thought it would be really cool to have a pillow to put on the couch with the quilt hanging behind it or over it or on it, you name it, right? And so I'm going to take you through a series of putting together a pillow using a block, as well as doing a Prairie Point binding on that pillow. So it's kind of a double dose, and therefore 2 episodes, because this week I'm going to cover preparing for the pillow making, and then next week we're actually going to put the pillow together. All right, so I'm going to take you step by step, but basically we need a 12-inch block. Doesn't matter, but if you want to use my Turning Up Pumpkins pattern to make yourself an extra block, that would be fabulous. And so what I want to do is I have a 16-inch form. And I will have a couple of these available on my website. You can also check with your local quilt shop. But I like the 16-inch because it allows me to put on an extra border around my block to make it a little bit more secure. And if you are making, or if you are using a form that's a pillow form that's 16 by 16, you actually want your block to be 16.5 by 16.5. So that gives me room, and I'm going to take you through those steps to put together, to make this block a little bit bigger, and therefore will fit this pillow perfect. All right. The other thing you will need is we are going to need, I'm going to use background strips. You could use whatever. So because my block is 12.5 to start, I'm going to have 2 that are cut 2.5 by 12.5, and then I'm going to have 2 background strips that are 2.5 by 16.5. All right, and those are what I'm going to take you through putting onto your block, which will then make your block 16.5 by 16.5. Now, I'm going to do a split backing for the pillow because I want the pillow to be able to be slipped in and slipped out, because this pillowcase I'll put away when it's not the season, and I'll put a different pillowcase onto my form. All right, so you can change them up as holidays come, or you can make one for your regular decor. It's really fun, and it allows you to have a, a mini quilt on your pillow. All right, so because I'm doing the split back, so I can slip it in and out, I am going to use up some of my extra border fabric, and those are cut at 10.5 by 16.5, and I'm going to need 2 of those. So 2 cuts of 10.5 by 16.5. All right, and that's going to be my backing of my pillow. Now, because I'm going to take this off and on, I doubt I'll wash it unless something happens, but I want to protect the back of these seams. So I'm also going to need, and I'm just going to use background. You could even use muslin. This is not going to be seen. It's just going to be inside the pillow and protecting your quilt block against rubbing on your form so that you don't have those seams come loose. So you're going to need a 16.5 by 16.5 inch square of some fabric that when it's put behind your block is not going to interfere. So I'm going to go ahead and use my leftover background fabric. So as you can see, this is really nice and easy to use up fabric that you may have left from your larger project. Speaking of which, we are also going to need, I have threads everywhere all the time, 20 extra 4.5 inch squares. So when I made my block, my pumpkin block, it used 4.5 inch squares. So I just cut some leftovers. The pattern called for 10 to 11 fat quarters. I used 11, so I had plenty of extra. And so you basically need to cut 20 different, doesn't have to be different. I'm using 2 of each fabric because I used 11 fabrics in my block. But basically you're going to need 20 4.5 inch squares of whatever color you want to feature, all right, in our unit. So one more time, let me go through that, and I will pop it up on the screen as I say it so you can write it down and pause it if need be. You will need 2 background strips, ideally, of 2.5 by 12.5 inch strips. You will then need, also in background, 2.5 by 16.5 background strips. You will then need, of whatever you want to put on the back of your pillow, you are going to need 2 10.5 by 16.5 inch pieces, rectangles basically. And then you will need, to protect the piecing of your block, you are going to need a 16.5 by 16.5 inch piece of fabric that will not show through to your pillow front, which is your block. And then you need 20 4.5 inch squares. All right, and I'm going to take you through how we're going to prepare all of this. So let me change my camera angle and we will get started. All right, so the first thing that you want to do is always square up your block. So your block in this case should be 12.5 by 12.5. So I've done that for my block, and now I'm going to take my background strips and I'm going to sew them on. So I made sure that this was 12.5 by 12.5. So consider these like mini borders. And I'm going to sew on my sides first. And what I like to do, I gotta shuffle my bracelet so I can put my pins on. I actually have this really cool pin holder coming that I can't wait for, that I think will transfer me from using my wrist pin. Anyhow, so I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to pin the end, right, and then I'm going to pin the bottom here and then the middle of the strip, and I'm going to stitch with my pumpkin block on top. All right, I'm going to go put down my best 1/4 inch. All right, so I set that seam and I press towards my background strip. I'm going to do the same here. Now it would be really easy to see it and flip it here, but we want to turn it over. You always want to put your piece on top and usually work in your background strip here. All right, so the 2 ends. it'll allow you to really see your units here. And so you can see here, my pressing got a little flip there. So it helps you keep that straight, because you really don't want what I call twisted sisters. All right, so as I'm stitching this, I'm going to be able to see exactly where my little points are and hit them. All right, so I'm going to go put this on. All right, so now I'm ready to put the top and the bottom on the same way. All right, so I'm going to pin the ends, and I'm going to do this for both. I won't bore you with the step-by-step, but you basically want to always pin those ends and at least put one in the middle. All right, and if you want, you can fold this strip right in half and kind of give it a finger press to determine where your halfway mark is, to make sure that you're lining it up. But if you squared up your block to 12.5 and you cut your strips to 12.5, this should be really easy, right? This is the easiest quilt you've ever put a border on. All right, so I'm going to sew this on, do the same with the other side, and then we'll regroup. All right, so I've put on the top and the bottom, and I've pressed them both away. So set my seam, finger pressed and pressed, right? Always good pressing skills. So now what I want to do is I want to create my pillow top. So I'm going to actually put this on the back of my block. All right, now you could by all means quilt this or put like a really thin batting, maybe flannel in the middle of it. I don't, but there's no reason that you couldn't. So if you want to quilt it, you could, you know, just come through and do like a stitch in the ditch or whatever. What I'm going to do is just put a scant, maybe not even a scant 1/4 inch, more like 1/8 of an inch, just all the way around my block. All right, so I'm just going to start by pinning the corner, and I'm putting it so just like if you did a quilt, the right side of the fabric is out, wrong sides are together. And it's really just to protect when I put my quilt, right, or my pillow insert in my case, that as I'm taking this in and out each year, that I'm not messing up the seams. All right, so it's really just to protect the seams. So I'm basically just going to run a stitch along the outside on all 4 sides, because I'm not turning this inside out or anything like that. It's just strictly to protect the back of my quilt stitches. All right, so really easy peasy. I'll just take you over and show you really quickly just how I'm doing that. All right, so what I did is I pinned all the way around my block, and I have wrong sides together, and I'm going to use my 1/4 inch foot for FOF has what they call a perfect 1/4 inch, and it allows me to move over my needle. That's probably a little close. So I'm going to bring it over so that it's a more like 1/8 of an inch. All right. I'm going to go ahead and bring my needle down, and I'm going to just sew all the way around. The reason I want it less than 1/4 of an inch is because 1/4 inch is what I'm going to use to attach this to the back eventually. All right. So I want this seam to be inside. So just, I have these back, my pins back about 1/4 of an inch. That's a little trick you can do so you don't have to remove them, or you can remove them as you go. But since this is not piecing, I don't need them right up there at the edge, so I have them back over here. I didn't put them back as far. So, but normally I put them back about 1/4 of an inch, and then I don't have to be as worried about them. right. So when I get to this corner, you can either just go all the way through or you could pivot. I'm probably going to pivot. Just coming up to the end there. My machine hovers, so it makes it nice and easy for me to turn my fabric underneath. This doesn't have to be anything, perfect as far as straight, but you want it to remain under 1/4 of an inch. And if you're using matching thread, it probably wouldn't be that noticeable if you went over the 1/4 inch. All right, I'm just going to do this on all 4 sides. All right, so I'm just going to keep going, and I will show you when I finish. All right, so I sewed all 4 sides, and I'm inside of that 1/4 inch. Remember to turn your machine back to 1/4 inch afterwards if you did the little trick that I did. And it's just protecting the seams. By all means, you could go ahead and quilt this if you wanted to. It's going to be really taut over the pillow because we're making it to just the perfect size. So I find that it doesn't need any quilting, but it is your pillow top and you are welcome to do what you want. All right, next we want to prepare the 2 sides, the 2 backs that end up forming, the back of the quilt. The back of the quilt, the back of the pillow. All right, so what we need to do is we need to turn over one of the edges on both sides. So now my fabric is a little directional, so I want to make sure that I'm checking it. So these are the 2 sides that are going to overlap on the back, and I've just built in 2 inches. Again, it doesn't have to be much because the measurements I'm using are perfect for the pillow. I want it nice and packed. All right, so I'm going to take you over to the iron table and show you how to turn the edges. What I will do is mark them. I'll put a pin in them so that I remember which sides I am going to fold over and then stitch. All right, so I have both sides and I have marked the sides because of the direction. I want to make sure I remembered exactly which one gets folded. All right, so I'm taking my pin out. This is the side that I'm folding over. So I'm going to give it a little hit of best press with my mister. And then it doesn't have to be exact, but you want to shoot for 1/4 inch. All right. And I'm giving it a nice little finger press as I go. And then I'm going to come in with my iron and press it. All right, and now it gets folded over one more time, right, to give it a nice finish edge. Mine's still a little moist from the best press. All right, and I'm going to press it. And now I want to press it till it's dry. Now you can go ahead and pin this, or you could use Wonder Clips on it if you're afraid of it moving. But I have found with the best press and a nice press to dry, it stays pretty good. And I'll take that over to my machine. Now I'm going to do the same with this one. So I have my pin in the side that's going to get turned. All right, I'm going to do the exact same thing. All right. Oops. Helps if I finger press it first, right? So a nice little finger press. Like I said, you want it about 1/4 inch. You just want to be consistent. But remember, we only have a 2-inch overlap. So go ahead through. And again, you could measure it if you felt the... Oops. You gotta love it. You could measure it if you'd like, but I found that I'm usually pretty good with this. But again, I've had some practice. My grandmother had me rolling corners when I was a youngster with drapery making. All right, so again, press until it is dry. All right, so now I'm going to take this over and go stitch it. All right, so we're now going to stitch this. This guy's a little wonky, but again, it doesn't have to be perfect. All right, I've put my foot back to my 1/4 inch, and mine's just a little bit bigger than a 1/4 inch, and I'm good with that. You want to make sure that your thread is a little bit matching, or matching your fabric, because you will see this on one of the sides. All right, and then I'm going to come through with this one. Same way. You could backstitch those if you wanted to. I know this is going to be finished off in the pillow, so I don't really feel that the need to do that. All right. All right, so I have my 2 backs, right, completely pressed, stitched and pressed. So now they are ready to be the back, and I've put the borders on my block, and I've stitched, again with a scant 1/4, more like an 1/8 of an inch, a backing on the back of my quilt. You could choose to put, I probably wouldn't put batting, but you could put flannel in between, and if you want, you could go ahead and stitch this. I choose not to because my pillow is going to be pretty taut. All right, so that concludes our part 1 of our pumpkin pillow, soon to have Prairie Point binding on it. All right, so make sure you join me for week 18 when we finish our pumpkin pillow.